In the year 1882, a sheriff disappeared while investigating a family who claimed they could cure illness with blood. Weeks later, his badge was returned, sealed in a jar. And unsettling as that was, it wasn't even the worst tale hidden in these mountains. Welcome, friends, to Gothic Ledger, where the stories they try to bury still whisper from the ash and the dust. Before we begin tonight's descent, let me pause to thank you, our growing community, for helping this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. That milestone means more than I can say, and it's only the beginning. If you haven't joined us yet, I invite you to subscribe so together we can keep opening these forgotten pages. Your support keeps the lantern lit. Now, if you're watching from an old town, crossroads, a cabin road in the hills, or anywhere, the wind seems to spell names when it passes, drop your time and your location in the comments. We want to know where our witnesses are. And if your heart's still beating as you listen, give this video a like. It tells us you're still here. Tonight, we open 10 sealed case files. Fragments of truth never meant to be read aloud. What we found in the Appalachian dark was buried for a reason. As Sheriff Elias Penley wrote in the Rowan County Journal, 1882, God made these mountains high for a reason to keep what lives in them away from decent folk. The Marubone family settled the ridge above Hollow Bend sometime after 1817. They didn't arrive like a family moving westward. They arrived like a silence that spread. Their compound sat where the forest folded in on itself, where the sun seemed to forget to shine. They were not remembered for their presence, but for their absence. Census takers stopped visiting after 1840. Mail was never delivered. Eventually, the trail that led to their cabin was erased from county maps. To Hollow Bend, the Marubones were a quiet infestation. No dogs barked, no music drifted, no smoke rose from their chimney even in winter. Just stillness, like the place had been abandoned long before. But it hadn't. Their home was peculiar. 2 stories tall, no windows on the northern wall, and a slate roof that locals swore never leaked no matter how heavy the rains. Behind the house stood an outbuilding with no visible door. The townsfolk called it the watching shed. The attic was the great mystery. Silas Crowder, a deputy who later took his own life, swore that in 1879 he had peeked through a crack in the wooden slats. Inside, he saw 3 chairs arranged in a semicircle. Each chair held a mummified corpse, dressed in wedding clothes, mouths stitched shut with fishing line. And there was a 4th chair, empty. Facing them, a local woman, Elsie Landrum, was questioned in her 80s. She recalled a Marubone girl recorded as Mina or Minna entering her shop in 1866. The child, barely 10 years old, purchased kerosene and white thread. She paid with a silver dollar, pierced by 3 drilled holes straight through Lincoln's face. Elsie said the girl smelled like damp basements. She never blinked, not once. Their belief, whispered only in fragments, was simple, but chilling death was not separation, it was amplification. Burying the body silenced the spirit. Preserving the body kept it close. The townsfolk of Hollow Bend were complicit by silence. No lawman dared challenge the Marubones. No preacher would climb their ridge. And when a child went missing in 1868, it was simply understood. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone knew she had wandered too far uphill. The family survived on garden plots and forest traps. Some claimed they ate less than a man should and more than an animal ought. One journal entry salvaged from a burned church box in 1883 read, "I saw the eldest Marubone son walking barefoot in the frost. He did not speak, but he hummed. God help me. The sound was like furniture sliding across the floor above me. No Marubone ever attended school." Once in 1871, the county sent a teacher, Miss Harriet Coates. 4 days later, she vanished. The only trace was her teaching slate hung from a tree branch etched with one word, "Listen." Above every door in their compound numbers were carved. Always 3, sometimes 6. A bootlegger named Jarvis Den once mistook their ridge for a smuggling route. He was found 2 days later, wandering barefoot in the forest, sobbing. Over and over he muttered, "They showed me the 3rd door. It's in the cellar. But it isn't real." The cellar, of course, has never been found. Not by deputies, not by state officials. Yet account after account swears of a hidden door beneath the roots. The line of the Marubones began to thin after 1903. A brutal winter struck the ridge, and with it came an epidemic that swept through the hollows. Many ridge dwellers perished, yet whispers suggest the family's rituals didn't die. They merely sank deeper underground. In 1926, a WPA surveyor recorded a chilling account. While mapping the boundary near Hollow Bend, he noticed pale children watching him from the trees. Their eyes were fixed, their faces expressionless. When he returned the following day with a colleague, the children were gone. In their place, arranged in a perfect triangle, were 3 wooden chairs. One of them was still warm, as though someone had only just risen from it. There has never been a conclusive photograph of a Marubone. Every attempt to document their faces in records ends the same way: blurred, smudged, erased, or missing entirely. Even Sheriff Elias Penley's journal falters. His final entry on the family, written October 12, 1882, reads, "The bones are still talking. I hear them every time the wind comes from the ridge." Later, someone had crossed the line out in thick charcoal. Beneath it, a single word was added, "Sealed." What lies in fog does not ask to be seen. Reverend Thomas F. Gillings of Fletcher County understood this. His unpublished homily of 1902 carried that warning. And his warning leads us into another shadowed story. Fog Hollow does not appear on modern maps. Attempts to fix its boundaries collapse against shifting terrain records and the erosion of old logging roads. What is certain is this: from around 1840 until 1908, Fog Hollow was inhabited by a single extended bloodline, the Fletchers. Their isolationist habits, their strange architecture, and their refusal to appear in civil records left neighboring communities unsettled. Beyond the census of 1850, when Jacob and Alvina Fletcher first claimed 37 acres near Morrow Creek, no Fletcher name appeared in any official tax roll school ledger or court docket again. They vanished from paper, though not from the earth. Those who glimpsed the Fletcher homestead remembered its uncanny uniformity. Black pine boards, seams sealed with resin, no glass panes anywhere. Instead, heavy shutters sealed every opening, bolted even in the swelter of summer. The chimney expelled no smoke in winter. And though lanterns were never seen, travelers swore a strange glow leaked up from the soil itself. Some dismissed it as fungus. Others imagined buried lanterns or hidden chambers. None of the explanations satisfied. The most unsettling report was the ban on mirrors. Amos Candler, a postal agent, told his story in 1874. While delivering a misrouted parcel, he encountered a Fletcher child, no older than 12, standing silent on the porch. The boy's skin was pale, his pupils swollen black, and across his chest and arms ran lines of script carved or inked in a language Amos could not recognize. Attempting to barter for directions, Amos offered the child a small hand mirror. The boy recoiled, refusing to touch it, and whispered, "The glass eats your face." Nearby farm diaries mention other unsettling practices. The Fletcher family observed a year-round Lent. They ate only after sundown and only on lunar odd days. Children were seen with ribs jutting sharp beneath their skin. Elders stitched collars around their throats to forbid speech in daylight. In 1886, a merchant named Elbridgelow passed through Fog Hollow and saw 3 Fletcher boys standing barefoot in the icy creek. Their heads were shaved, their arms raised in a silent ritual. When Elbridge tried to speak to them, the boys turned in unison and opened their mouths. Their tongues were blackened, coated with what looked like soot or ink. Elbridge fled the hollow. He never returned. Some called the Fletchers remnants of a long-dead religious sect. Others whispered of cultists fasting and avoiding sunlight as penance for sins no one could name. But the truth remains buried. One thing is certain, no outsider who saw Fletcher by daylight ever lived long enough to describe it plainly. On the morning of February 13, 1908, smoke rose from the ridge. The Fletcher house burned. The fire was fast controlled, its destruction eerily symmetrical. Within minutes, the homestead was reduced to ash. And yet, despite the scale of the blaze, not a single body was recovered. The burn patterns told a story of their own. The Fletcher house hadn't fallen to flames in the way timber usually does. The char suggested an inward collapse, as though the structure had consumed itself from the inside out. Only one object survived the destruction. A heavy iron door torn from its hinges, etched with the number 44, and an inverted star. That door, according to reports, was brought to the county office in Whitesburg. But during a records transfer in 1912, it vanished. Its present location is unknown. From the fragments of Sheriff Harland Day's journal, handed down by his grandson, to a local folklorist, we know he visited the site 3 days after the fire. Beneath the ashes, he uncovered a shallow root cellar. Inside were 15 wooden chairs carved in a crescent. Each bore a single letter of the alphabet, no duplicates. In the center lay a mound of black cloth, still warm despite the snow. The rest of Day's journal is gone. His final entry reads, "The house had no windows, but something saw us just the same." By 1910, the Fletcher name was formally erased. County roll books purged their lineage after an unexplained courthouse flood destroyed the east wing, where records were kept. Only one ledger entry survived. Property release, Fletcher lot. Deed returned to earth by fire as agreed. Was this symbolic or literal? No one can say. Tracing descendants has proven fruitless. A boy named Warren F. Fletcher briefly surfaced in 1933 enrolled under state custody at a reform school. Before his second week ended, he vanished. His mattress was later found torn open from the inside as though something had crawled out. In his place lay a single note, written in perfect reverse cursive. They can't burn what was never lit. From here, the records bleed into another tale, one preserved in the diary of Dr. Wendell K. Hartswell, a Floyd County physician. His entry from 1873 describes a family whose name is still whispered with unease, the Dredges. The Dredge family lived on Blackroot Ridge, a slope where the soil was dark as coal and the water ran red for reasons no geologist ever agreed upon. The matriarch, Augusta Dredge, appeared from unknown origins in 1826. She bought land from a trapper who, according to legend, cut out his own tongue after signing the deed. Within months, locals avoided the ridge entirely. By 1830, no one dared pass beyond the seventh bend of the mountain trail. The Dredges called themselves herbalists, but their remedies bore little resemblance to medicine. They were known to draw blood from the sick, collecting it in copper bowls. The bowls were buried for 3 nights in soil mixed with crushed hawthorn and powdered bone. If the ritual was accepted, the fever would break. But there was always a price. One family in Lonesome Hollow swore the 9-year-old boy survived yellow fever after a dredge ritual. His hair turned snow white, and for the rest of his life, he spoke only in riddles. Another man cured of gangrene was found weeks later, asleep in a cemetery, arms stretched over 7 open graves, none of them his. The Dredges never asked for money. Instead, they left a mark. Every patient bore the same carved symbol on the left wrist, an hourglass, its upper bulb shattered. State investigators questioned Floyd County residents in 1884. They reported that those bearing the dredge mark suffered strange dreams. Hollow trees, teeth raining from the sky, staircases that turned back on themselves. Survivors grew pale, withdrawn, sensitive to sunlight. Some swore stagnant water carried whispers. Then came November 9th, 1878. Sheriff Obram Caro organized a search of the ridge after a pastor and 2 parishioners vanished on their way through. 5 deputies climbed the mountain. Only 1 returned. Deputy Horace Talon was found in a barn 2 days later, teeth rattling, gripping a shattered oil lamp. Again and again he repeated, "Don't open the 3rd jar." He was sent to the state asylum in Lexington, where he died in 1881. By then he had carved hundreds of blood glyphs into the stone walls with his fingernails. Not one of the symbols matched any known alphabet. A week after the failed search, the sheriff's badge arrived by post. It was sealed in a glass jar of unknown liquid. The jar was delivered to the county clerk by a barefoot child who gave no name. On its label in a steady hand were the words, "Rendered and returned. May the land forgive." That jar sealed with the sheriff's badge inside was logged into evidence. But in 1890, a courthouse fire consumed the records annex, leaving the rest of the building untouched. The jar was never seen again. Reverend Dillard Gray, who collected oral accounts in the 1890s, claimed the Dredge family followed a doctrine they called hemocathis. It was the belief that blood, if poisoned by sin or sickness, should not be drawn from the afflicted, but from a surrogate often chosen without consent. One interview survives, given by a midwife named Mercy Collins. She described finding a wooden basin filled with teeth near the Dredge property. Each tooth carried the same inscription, the number 13. The number recurred in countless reports, scratched into bark, stitched into hide dolls, even scrawled in charcoal on the door of a 1-room schoolhouse. That same week, its teacher vanished. Another rite was known simply as the drawing. Witnesses described Dredge men wielding curved bone knives and willow branches soaked in lye. Victims were bound, bled into clay jars, and sometimes released. Those who returned were altered mute, dazed, hollow-eyed. Others never came back. In 1906, the state launched a formal investigation into the Dredge line. It collapsed almost immediately. Land deeds were shredded. Birth records across 3 counties were stamped void. The field investigator Elijah Morehouse disappeared after sending a single telegram. They bleed what they cannot bury. 6 years later, his belongings surfaced in a train station locker. Among them was a journal bound in bark. Every page was blank except the last, which read, "They gave me health and took the year from me." Morehouse was never seen again. By 1911, the Dredge homestead was razed. No one claimed the act. Blackroot Ridge was abandoned, left to overgrowth and silence. Hunters say no animal crosses beyond the 7th bend. Near the ridge stands a marker stone, its carving nearly erased by weather. The words, still legible, are chilling. Life leaves. We stay. They watched. That's all they ever did. But when they looked at you, it felt like the last time anyone would. Harold Fitch, Station Master, 1903. But the stories didn't end there. In the spring of 1875, long before the homestead fell, 3 infants were discovered inside an abandoned Baltimore and Ohio freight car on the outskirts of the town's end rail yard. No one saw who left them. They were naked, bloodied, and wrapped in funeral linens sewn with black thread. A porter named Marcus Eddings described hearing a metallic cry, like wind drawn through iron teeth. Investigating, he found the triplets laid side by side, their eyes open, unblinking. The town christened them Thomas Elijah and Caleb Bellweather, after the Presbyterian minister who took them in despite dire warnings. Reverend Bellweather raised them in seclusion, claiming their fragile constitutions and their supposed spiritual gifts demanded isolation. They were never sent to school. Their diet consisted of boiled oats, black licorice root, and ash bread, a strange local recipe of burnt flour and salt. Church records describe the boys as pale, almost translucent, with identical grey eyes and high sloping foreheads. They never spoke in service. Instead, they stared fixedly, wordlessly, at chosen parishioners, most often those who carried illness or grief. One woman, Sarah Goodlin, collapsed mid-hymn after the brothers turned their gaze upon her. Her husband was found dead in their fields 3 days later. By the time they reached 10, the Bellwethers had acquired a reputation. Silence followed them, and death followed their silence. In April of 1886, Town's End suffered a string of tragedies: 3 miscarriages, a barn fire, 2 children drowned in the same week. In every case, witnesses swore they had seen one of the Bellweather boys sitting on the church steps the day before, silent hands folded, eyes fixed. It soon became accepted law in Town's End that each brother carried his own omen: Thomas for fire, Elijah for sickness, Caleb for the death of children. By 1889, townsfolk left offerings outside the rectory in desperate hope of warding them off bundles of mint coins drilled through the center-polished animal bones. None of it worked. The most disturbing accounts became known as the funeral gazes. Time and again, the Bellweather brothers appeared uninvited at wakes and burials. Sometimes, they arrived before the grieving family. At least once they were spotted hours before the deceased had even died. No one saw them enter. No one saw them leave. Jedediah Knox, a town undertaker, wrote in his journal, "They never cried, never closed their eyes. They watched the dead like they were waiting for them to move again. On 3 occasions, coffins were found opened the morning after burial. Nothing stolen, nothing disturbed except one thing. Always the same thing. The tongue of the dead." Then, in the brutal winter of 1902, the brothers disappeared. Reverend Bellweather, wasting from fever, shuttered the church and turned away visitors. Mail piled high on the steps. On March 3rd, he was discovered in the pulpit, eyes ink-black tongue, gone. Behind the altar, a hidden staircase was found. It led to a crypt no blueprint had ever recorded. There, 3 glass caskets stood in silence, each containing one of the Bellweather brothers. They were embalmed, clothed in white vestments, hands folded over brass plates etched with 2 words. He saw no trauma, no illness, no date of death. Only a floor etched with a single carved symbol, 3 eyes within a triangle surrounded by 44 tally marks. Reverend Bellweather never wrote of the crypt in his journals. The brothers' bodies were removed, buried together behind the church, and the stairway was sealed with concrete. The coroner's report contained a numbered appendix, but page 4 was missing. In 1923, the office denied it had ever existed. Yet a former clerk, John Turlow, produced a photograph of what he swore was that lost page mailed to him anonymously in 1914. It bore no words, only the triangle and 3 sets of fingerprints pressed in dried blood. Decades later, in 1967, a maintenance crew restoring the old church unearthed a child's shoe beneath the floorboards. Inside was a scrap of parchment labeled Caleb. Drawn in charcoal was the church itself, but every wall, window and cloud was an eye. All open, all watching. The church is gone now. The land remains barren, unnaturally quiet. Their law was silence, and they kept it with hooks. Fragmented testimony, Cooper Inquiry, 1912. Page lost to mildew. Nestled in a steep fold of the Appalachian range lay the settlement of Thistlevane, founded in 1823 by Elias Sloam. Once a circuit judge turned preacher, Sloam's doctrines on noise and the devil's tongue first appeared in the revival sermons of 1829. At its peak, Thistlevane numbered nearly 80 souls, all of them direct or marital descendants of Sloam's bloodline. No road ever reached the town. Only a narrow trail, forked at a stone post, carved with the phrase, "To speak is to sin." That marker is gone now, but the inscription was preserved in a postman's sketchbook drawn during a failed census attempt in 1857. Today, those who walk the Thistlevane site swear that even the birds refuse to sing within its borders. Compasses spin without bearing. Audio equipment records only static, broken at intervals by a whisper, faint but insistent. 1, 2, 2, 2. No Kindr child was ever baptized, but the graveyard remembers their names. Reverend Alfred Mortimer, Powell County, Parish Ledger. Marginal note, 1883. High atop the limestone cliffs east of Stanton, where the ridge narrows and the air grows thin, an overgrown trail leads to Mourner's Peak, a place absent from most maps, yet murmured about in every Powell County tavern. The terrain is skeletal fog, clinging even when the skies are clear. It was here on that wind-struck bluff that the Kindr family raised their estate in 1866, only weeks after the last Confederate flags were lowered in Kentucky. The house, spoken of in whispers as the Bellweather house, rose from black pine and native stone. Its roof sagged like a collapsed lung. Tall shuttered windows stared down the valley. The chimney never smoked. Mail delivered, there was never answered. Strangers approaching the door were turned away, not by words, but by silence, or by the echo of hymns, low and mournful, drifting down the cliffs at dusk. The Kindr lineage resisted all record-keeping. No midwife ever claimed to deliver a Kindr child. No marriage license bore their name. Yet on the hill behind the Bellweather ruins, 38 tombstones bear their mark, most etched only with initials and dates. None list births, only deaths. And in the pattern of those deaths, one truth became clear. Every daughter's stone marked an end near her 17th year. Every son lived longer, often into his 50s. But each boy, without exception, was captured in photographs or sketches wearing a veil. The veils varied muslin, rawhide lace, but always black, always full-faced, and always adorned with 3 black buttons sewn where the mouth should be. Locals whispered the buttons were not decoration. In 1891, a schoolteacher named Mo Elkins swore she saw a Kindr boy lift his veil to drink from a stream. Beneath it, his lips were crudely stitched with surgical thread. The daughters, meanwhile, were rarely seen. Townsfolk recalled them only in childhood, then gone before reaching their 17th year. Illness, fever, confinement, and then silence. No daughter's remains were ever recovered. Abner Kroll, a caretaker who fled after just 3 weeks, claimed the Bellweather's upper hall was called the Wing of Forgetting. 6 locked doors lined it, each branded with a Roman numeral and a carved star, nailed shut from the outside. Behind one he swore he heard humming. Behind another scratching. Kroll was later found barefoot in Clay City, incoherent, clutching a waterlogged Kindr ledger. Only one line could still be read. A daughter must return to the vale before the moon is made full. The family's twilight hymns remain the most infamous legacy. Valley farmers claimed to hear their dirges unfailingly at sundown, voices in minor key, carrying words no one could discern. Those who lingered to listen grew faint, their bones aching as though hollowed. One deputy bled from the nose. Another man claimed his dog howled and refused to enter the house for a week. Among the ruins of a collapsed cabin near the property, searchers found a sealed journal. Inside was a single Latin phrase, Canis post vesperum tolletit voc. The hound shall take the voice after vespers. The song after dusk takes the voice. In 1901, state investigator Samuel F. Coates attempted to audit the Bellweather property over a tax dispute. His report never reached Frankfurt. Instead, a parcel arrived at the courthouse desk of Judge R.G. Falmer Coates' pocketbook and a shattered monocle wrapped in Kindr monogrammed linen. No further inquiry was authorized. Yet, an unsigned addendum surfaced years later in the Powell County archives. It spoke of a hidden room in the Bellweather house, its walls paneled entirely in coffin lids. Each lid bore a date and a single letter. There were 17 lids, One was missing. The file vanished in 1907 by order of the county clerk, citing ecclesiastical interference. The final confirmed sighting of a Kindr came in 1932. A veiled man laid a basket of black lilies on the altar of Stanton's stone chapel. Pinned beneath was a note, "The song is over. She walks beneath." The Bellweather estate has stood abandoned ever since. Still, hikers report hearing voices on the wind, female spectral rising from heights above where no trail climbs. Always singing, always distant. They didn't speak in church, but the dogs would howl if a liar crossed the threshold. Recollection of Reverend L. Sandley, 1896. Record redacted. South of Cloverport in the pine-choked basin, known as Houndsbone Hollow, the dirt runs slick and red, with heat carrying the metallic scent of old iron. It was here that the Vexley family held their estate from 1814 until 1899. The Vexleys were once hunters' livestock appraisers. Later they became known for something darker, the breeding of hounds. Not for deer, not for fox, but for what their journals called the scent of impurity. The beasts were monstrous coal-dark bloodhounds. Locals called them the sin biters. Chained not by rope, but by black iron shackles, each link inscribed with initials that often matched no known Vexley name. By the years after the war, townsfolk had come to the Vexleys with their scandals and suspicions. The accused thieves, adulterers, supposed witches were led into the woods behind the estate. They were told to walk a half-mile in silence. When they vanished from sight, the hounds were loosed. If the dogs returned alone, the accused was said to be cleansed. If they returned bloodied, the accused was unclean, buried without sermon or prayer. Though never entered into county ledgers, the practice called the blood rite appears in at least 5 journals and a constable's damaged notebook from 1874. The symbol that marks the pages is always the same, a dog's paw, 6-toed. Every Vexley male bore another mark, a ring of thorns branded behind the left ear. No infant baptism records exist for them. No communion ever taken. A line discovered beneath church floorboards in 1907 reads, "Their offering is not bread. It is obedience. It is teeth." The family was seen mostly at twilight, wrapped in heavy wool even in summer. Their speech was stiff, their grammar strange. They spoke of the living only in the past tense. He was a good man. Always was. Between 1868 and 1896, 12 bodies were found in or near the hollow. All were mauled jugulars, torn clean torsos untouched, and the hands gone entirely. No predator was ever seen, but paw prints the size of dinner plates were discovered circling the corpses in perfect spirals. One boy survived, Luke Pendergrass, age 11. His mother's body lay beside him in a cornfield. Luke never spoke again. His wrists bore punctures, needle-fine 8 in total, aligned in pairs. Not bites, not claws. Confined later to an asylum in Louisville, Luke scrawled a single word over 400 times on the walls of his cell, written in chicken bone: bark. No member of the Vexley family attended his mother's funeral. The last known member of the Vexley family, Judson Vexley, was seen wandering barefoot through town in January of 1899. His shirt was stiff with dried blood. A frayed leash hung in loops around his wrist. Sheriff Haggart testified that Judson muttered only one thing: "I turned the wrong one loose." That same afternoon, Judson scaled the gallows unused since 1855 and hanged himself with the leash. His neck did not break. Hours later, when the body was cut down, investigators found claw marks raked across his abdomen, self-inflicted fingernails filed to points. In his mouth, folded tight, was a strip of burlap bearing 3 words: "It still runs." The last of the Vexley hounds was never found. County officials ordered the estate burned and the earth salted. Yet weeks later, a deputy returned and uncovered a cellar door. Below were 7 cages, each empty, except for neatly arranged children's shoes at the foot of every gate. The deputy's account was written into ledger book G pages 44-45. Those pages were later torn out. The next surviving entry begins mid-sentence. "No further mention shall be made. Houndsbone Hollow lies overgrown, undeveloped. Hikers who stray near its borders sometimes report the sound of panting behind them, though no dog is ever seen." In 1981, an amateur folklorist claimed to discover a leash nailed to a tree. The word "unclean" burned into the leather. His submitted photograph was lost, misfiled under veterinary anomalies. In the sheriff's evidence vault, a single iron tag remains. It resembles a dog license. The inscription reads, "Judges do not bark." The stone bore his name, the date, and the phrase "end scene." He died 3 days later. I watched the carving happen. There was no hammer, only silence. Deputy Elias Moore testimony, redacted 1892. In the western fold of Nicholas County, hidden behind lichen-strangled pines and a scar of hollow earth called Dead Horse Cut, lay the lands of the Graveite family. Quarrymen, sculptors, first recorded on maps in 1822, though headstones bearing their name stand decades earlier, inscriptions worn smooth by time. The Graveites kept a private yard called the Ledger Garden, an iron-fenced field entwined with rosevine knots. Inside stood rows of upright stones, hundreds, perhaps thousands, none buried beneath them, each carved with full names, dates of birth, and dates of death yet to come. Every predicted death came true. No craftsman ever saw the Graveites purchase tools. No sound of hammer or chisel ever carried across the ridge. When questioned in 1877, old Lauren Graveite replied only, "The stone remembers. We just bring it forward." One fragmentary journal, Exhibit C, since misplaced, described a rite called the measuring. For 13 days, the soon-to-be engraved were watched from afar. Movements, handwriting, even breathing were noted. On the 14th day, the stone was set. Some fled after discovering their names etched in granite. One man reached as far as Cincinnati before plunging through a factory skylight on the exact date inscribed. Witnesses said his fall was unearthly silent. The Ledger Garden stretched more than a mile black granite and veined marble, all untouched by moss. Unlike cemeteries, no graves marked the ground. Only monuments anticipating what had not yet occurred. Above every name arched the same design, an inverted horseshoe. An architectural historian identified it as the Ward of Final Return, a medieval French sigil linked to heretical sects who claimed death could be scheduled, bargained with. In 1884, Sheriff Daniel Mars received an unsigned letter. Enclosed was a charcoal rubbing of a stone, his name carved upon it, the date only 6 days away. a warrant was issued. 15 men entered the Graveite estate. The house was barren, no mirrors, no clocks. But beneath it in the cellar was a sealed chamber, the ledger room. Inside stood shelves of leather-bound volumes cataloguing not only townsfolk, but strangers far away and infants not yet born. One book titled Partial Rites contained diagrams of hand positions and circular glyphs, symbols noted only in apocalyptic scripture. At the center rose a pedestal. Upon it rested a single headstone slick with fresh black ink. A new name was forming. The ink did not drip downward from a pen. It rose upward from the stone itself. The search ended when 3 deputies fell ill. One convulsed, another spat blood. The third swore he heard his own name repeated again and again from beneath the floor. The house was burned the next morning under emergency ordinance. At Ironwood's County Courthouse, the original investigation files still show a gap. Pages 43 through 48 are missing. No explanation. Page 44 contains only a cryptic reference to a text called Living Tombs, Projected Stone Rituals. That title exists nowhere in county records. The handwriting on page 43 is subtly different from the rest, tighter, deliberate as if copied under duress. A graphologist confirmed the anomaly. He died in 1903 struck by a falling church bell outside a cemetery. His name afterward was discovered among the Ledger Garden stones. He had never set foot in Nicholas County. One survivor remained. Frances Deek, aged 12, brought by horse with her mother to view the Graveite grounds. Her mother's name appeared carved beneath the phrase, "Last light taken." She died of fever 2 nights later. Decades afterward, Frances told interviewers she heard whispers every time she walked past a cemetery, always in the same tone as her mother's dying breath. Her final letter, found unopened after her death, read, "They carved my name into the stone behind my eyes. Today the Ledger Garden lies hidden under dense woodland. No stones are visible from the surface, but in 2006, surveyors with ground-penetrating sonar recorded flat anomalies lined in rows beneath the forest floor. Coordinates were given to the State Historical Commission. Their case file reference 122HH18 was marked closed. No landmark found, but inside the sealed folder was an envelope containing a single undeveloped photograph. On its back, in fading ink, someone had written, "Still waiting," from the field journal of Dr. Amory Hall, Appalachian Anthropological Survey, 1902, seized restricted entry. The feather births were rare. But the unfathered, those were the ones who screamed, tucked in a basin of oak and shale where parish maps show only a smudge labeled Old Parish Line. There once stood a place called Raven's Stitch. There, in a sagging salt box farmhouse, blackened with crows, 3 generations of the Dunkrow women served as midwives, though many whispered they were something else. Gatekeepers. They were not trained. They were not sanctioned by the parish. But no parishioner born between 1850 and 1880 arrived without at least one Dunkrow hand guiding them. And yet, the children spoke of a constant, not all were allowed to leave. The Dunkrow sisters, Ruth Hesper and Ellen, were pale women, sharp-boned, who spoke only in murmurs. They wore mourning lace at all hours, boots, bound in red thread to keep from walking over the dead. A single upstairs room was known as the watch loft, its lone window fixed east. No visitor was permitted inside. In 1886, one constable pried open a shutter and looked. He reported seeing a crib of stone, not wood, painted eyes on every wall, and movement under the floorboards. Not crawling, listening. His statement was burned by parish order. He never returned to service. In 1903, beneath the Dunkrow floorboards, investigators recovered 15 bone needles etched with initials and dates. Some matched baptismal records. Others corresponded to no known child. Alongside them, a candle holder fashioned from jawbone and a basket of eggshells arranged in a ring. Many of the initials belonged to infants dead before their first-year victims of what was called bone thinning, silent lung refusal of the world. No charges were filed. In 1899, State Health Inspector Dr. Nathan Lear began an inquiry after 3 stillbirths in a single week, all mothers attended by the Dunkrows. In their possession, he recorded, was a book titled The Silence Index. It contained no names, only black-inked spirals, triangles and feather symbols drawn counterclockwise. When questioned, Ruth Dunkrow reportedly said, "Some mouths are too loud for the grave to close. Best they never open." 3 weeks later, the courthouse burned. Dr. Lear vanished. His satchel was discovered at the bottom of a well. Inside, a single crow feather, wrapped in milk-soaked linen. By 1901, Raven's Stitch was abandoned. The Dunkrow house stood hollow, its windows broken, its walls rotting. Yet for years afterward, candlelight flickered in the upper room. Priests from the nearby parish refused to sanctify the grounds. One who attempted collapsed mid-right jaw, fractured as if struck, but claimed nothing touched him. In a letter to his diocese, since redacted, he wrote, "The land listens, and it remembers the names we buried too soon." That letter is gone from all archives. In 1964, when crews prepared the valley for damming, they unearthed a cluster of unmarked graves. Some were scarcely 10 inches long. Each contained a fragment of red thread and a blackened feather. Scattered among them, bone needles etched with names no local family recognized. Photographs taken for university study, developed with dark smudges in their corners. Shapes like wings spread across the frame. The negatives were deemed faulty. Construction halted. The valley flooded. Today, when the waters recede, bones rise with it. They did not pray for God to arrive. They prayed for him to stay away. Unsigned sermon nailed to a cedar tree near Sallow Creek, 1873. Sallow Creek is not a creek. It does not flow. It cuts a dry wound of shale and copper on Wayne County's western fringe, where early cartographers sketched rivers only to later erase them. Behind its ridge, behind tangles of poison sumac and limestone slabs, stood the remains of the Elgrave estate, a scatter of stone homesteads and root cellars surrendered to moss. No parish birth records mention the Elgraves before 1819, yet gravestones marked Elgrave date to the 1700s. Death logs list none of them. The family persisted for a century in silence until they disappeared from all census records after 1850. Attempts to count them were returned blank or crossed out in red ink. Locals whispered, "The Elgraves never left. They went inward." At the compound's center was a structure known as the mouth. Official records call it A chapel but no Christian mark was ever recorded. Instead, it was hewn from the cliff face, arched, black-stained, flanked by two faceless statues on their knees. The entrance bore no door, only grooves cut deep into the stone as if something had been dragged inside. In 1871, circuit preacher Reverend Ellis Mardane entered the mouth. He returned barefoot 3 days later, whispering in an unknown tongue. He died 6 hours later of dehydration. In his pocket was a scrap of parchment. 3 words burned into it with pitch. It knew me. Recovered from the ruins was a volume investigators called The Book of Still. Pages were missing. The text described rituals of silence fasting and threshold walking, sealing oneself motionless for 77 hours within a chamber called the Pale Hall. The book made frequent reference to the undying litany, a spoken phrase passed once per generation. No syllables were ever recorded. One missing page was replaced with a charcoal sketch, concentric staircases spiraling downward into a mouth-shaped void. The archivist assigned to transcribe the text abandoned his post, citing auditory hallucinations and nausea. Committed to Ashfork State Asylum, he carved into his padded wall the phrase, "Seal the litany," 63 times before removing his own tongue. His file remains sealed. From 1863 onward, neighbors reported strange phenomena at the ridge. Thin columns of light escaping vents in the rock, a low hum resonating beneath the soil. A pale figure, tall, motionless, mistaken for a statue until it blinked. One by one, the Elgrave homes emptied. Windows blackened. Livestock released to wander. The last known child, Ezra Elgrave, was seen near the riverbank, wearing a wooden mask shaped like an inverted bell. When asked where his family had gone, he replied, "They are listening now. I cannot be louder than the rock." He vanished before dusk. His tracks ended at the sealed chapel. In 1884, a federal geological survey team breached the chapel. Only one man returned, cartographer Julius Craner. At dusk, he stumbled out with no tools, no maps, and a single phrase he repeated again and again. It was already drawn. That night, he died in his sleep. His lungs contained not water, but ash. His sketches showed the chapel entrance again and again. But with each repetition, less stone, more bone. As though the rock itself had begun to live. Federal Order 772E sealed the site, citing geological instability. Trespass warnings were posted. But in a private collection, a secondary report surfaced in 1931. Among its notes was a parchment listing Elgrave descendants with death dates projected into the next century. One matched a sitting state senator who died the following month in apparent suicide. At the page's bottom was a note: "You do not find the chapel, it finds the loud." Today, hikers near Sallow Creek Ridge sometimes describe hearing hymns rising from beneath the stone, slow, arrhythmic, deeper than human throats. Others see faint light pulsing through the rock like veins in the mountain, glowing before going dark again. No confirmed entrance remains. Yet since 1998, 3 park rangers have vanished along the ridge, and in 2015, a drone survey ended with 20 seconds of static. Then, one image appeared, uncommanded, untagged. It showed the inside of a stone chamber, empty except for a single pew, facing inward.